Chapter 11. Soil and Food. Depleted soil, a cause of plant and animal deterioration. The problem of treating and using the soil has long been considered from the standpoint of agriculture. Farmers have long been taught to provide their land with special chemicals so as to produce good yields of their crops. The good yields were regarded as desirable solely in consideration of the farmer's pocketbook. No effort has been made on the part of the farmer to produce crops that supply foods which provide us with the chemicals we need for health. The motive has always been one of profit, and the farmer's profit never has much to do with the vitamin and mineral content of the foods he grows. We have seen that the foods of the primitives often contain over 10 times as many vitamins and minerals as do the foods of civilized man. The high vitamin and mineral content of the primitive's food is due largely to the fact that he eats it in an unrefined condition, but is also due to the fact that his foods usually are grown on good soil, which is not in a depleted condition. Many of the foods of the primitive are grown on virgin soil. The natives of the South Seas use an abundance of wild fruits, which grow in the fertile virgin soil of the forest. The isolated Swiss of the Loitchental Valley use a method of agriculture which has preserved the fertility of the soil for centuries. Growing in these good soils, their plants are sure to be better nourished and richer in vitamins and minerals. Civilized man can obviously produce only a very small percentage of his foods on undepleted soil. He must use the same land again and again. When he does this, he removes much of the mineral content of the soil with each crop. He attempts to replace a few of the minerals, but does not meet with much success. They can add only slightly to the nutritional qualities of the food. In spite of the years they have been employed, our soils are continually becoming more and more depleted. Civilized man also has to reckon with soil erosion. It is through erosion that the soil loses many of its minerals. The minerals are washed from the soil into the streams and rivers, and often find their eventual home at the riverbed or in the ocean. Using the conventional methods agriculture, this erosion cannot be prevented. Rather, it is increased and becomes a greater problem with each year. Associated with the increasing depletion of the soil, the increasing necessity of using insecticides as a protection against insects. Various sprays are also used as a means of protecting the plant against certain diseases. The disease and insect menace is indeed a serious one. Again and again it has been shown that the materials used to poison the insect or ward off plant diseases are poisonous to man. There are many medical records of deaths which have resulted from the use of foods sprayed with arsenic, the chief form of insecticide used. Insects seem to prefer the sap of unhealthy plants grown in demineralized soil. Diseases tend to develop in the same plants. The spraying problem is essentially a soil problem. Human health deteriorates in direct proportion to the degree to which our soils are depleted. Dr. Weston Price, he found that mortality rates for heart disease and pneumonia vary in accordance with the depletion of the soil. The areas which have been settled longest usually possess the poorest soils and the highest mortality rates. Good soil in general, followed by better human health, and poor soil is followed by deteriorated human health. The history of races and the extent to which they have depleted their soil shows this conclusively. It has even been noted that the facial structure markedly changes, with beauty becoming more rare as their soils become exhausted. The difference in the mineral and vitamin content of foods grown in different soils is by no means slight. The calcium content of the pasturage grown in Pennsylvania and British Columbia is over 10 times that of the pasturage of Arizona, simply because of the differences in the soil. The phosphorus content of the pasture has been seen to vary depending upon the soil. In one series of tests, the pasturage in one area was found to contain 60 times as much phosphorus as the pasturage of other areas. Sea vegetation has been heralded as a superior source of vitamins and minerals. For this reason, it is often sold in its dehydrated form in health food stores as a supplement to the diet. As a general rule, sea vegetation contains from 10 to 20 times as many minerals as do land-grown vegetables. The reason again goes back to the soil. The seabed is undepleted. The vegetation which arises from it is consequently rich in minerals. It is quite possible that land vegetation could be made as valuable as sea vegetation if we could but restore the fertility to the soil. But can we do this? Many prominent scientists claim that they know of no method of doing so. Agricultural orthodoxy offers no hope of solution. The farmer and research worker can tell you nothing about restoring the original fertility to depleted soils. However, the case is not so hopeless as it may first seem. In fact, it is everything but hopeless. It is only by closing our eyes to the evidence that we can insist that it is impossible to restore fertility to the depleted soil. In the matter of from 2 to 5 years or slightly longer, any soil can be restored to the fertility it once possessed. This is no idle theory. It is a proven fact. The curse of the plow. It was left to Edward H. Faulkner to discover exactly why soil becomes depleted and exactly how its original fertility might be restored. Faulkner, a professor at the University of Oklahoma, went back to the land to do some independent research with soil. Instead of accepting the tradition of agricultural science, he questioned everything and disregarded the very premises and basis of this science. After much study, he suspected that the moldboard plow might be the agent which is destroying soil fertility. He noted that no one had ever advanced a scientific reason for plowing. Plowing just seems to be a custom with farmers. The experiments of Faulkner on his own farm, followed by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, have proven conclusively that the plow has done more than anything else to deplete the soil. Faulkner restored the fertility to his soil simply by disking green manure, the decaying vegetation and plant residue which covered most of the Earth's surface, into the surface of the ground, and by eliminating the use of the plow. Restoring fertility was hardly a problem at all. It was indeed very easy. It did not involve all sorts of fertilizers or soil treatments. Rather, it involved only that he stop interfering with nature. Provide the soil with plenty decaying vegetative matter, do not prevent it from making use of the same, and it is certain to remain fertile. It is as simple as that. When land is plowed, virtually all the green manure is sandwiched in the soil about 6 to 8 inches below the surface. Here it forms a barrier to the water, which should otherwise rise from the water table through the soil to the surface. Thus, the upper 6 to 8 inches of the S become very dry. Most of the capillary action of water movement is broken. The plants suffer from lack of water in times of drought. They may die altogether. There is escaping this. It is not until the green manure has completely decayed that normal capillary action may be restored. The decay of vegetation produces much carbon dioxide. When the vegetation decays well below the surface, this gas moves in between all of the particles of soil, driving out the air to the surface. The nitrogen, which forms a part of the air, is thus lost. The plants are robbed one of their most important sources of nutritive matter. The combination of carbon dioxide and water forms carbonic acid, one of the most effective solvents of plant food minerals. In the presence of carbonic acid, these minerals are reduced to forms which the plant may use. When land is plowed, it becomes so dry that there is little no water with which the carbon dioxide may combine. The result is a lack of carbonic acid in the soil and the consequent release of insufficient minerals for the plants. Land is most often plowed in the early spring after extensive thaws, when it is still relatively wet and plastic. The furrow slice is compressed when it is separated from its base. Later, it is exposed to the wind and sunshine turned into a large clod. Smoothing implements turn clod into many small pieces, but they do not correct the original damage. The small clods are just so much soil which is mustered out of use for the season. The tiny particles of silt, clay, and sand in plowed do not absorb water. A little of the water clings to their surface. The rest moves about between them. The movement of the water in and over the soil carries the tiny particles with it. This is known as erosion. In many cases, the loss of all of the original rich topsoil occurs through the erosive process. The result is a thoroughly depleted bed which cannot supply the plants with enough of the vital elements they need. The plowing of land makes the agriculturist heir totally dependent upon the weather. If there is an unusually large amount of rainfall, the immediate surface of the soil is entirely covered by water. On the other hand, if rainfall been moderate or slight, the ground is usually too dry. The water which normally would have been preserved from the previous season has disappeared, the plowed land being incapable of absorbing and holding much water. Plants grown on depleted plowed soils are particularly susceptible to disease and insect pests. Plants are comparable to all forms of animal life in the sense that they suffer from disease when their supply of nutritive matter is defective. The plowed land, lacking as it does a good supply of available minerals, offers the perfect environment for plant disease. It likewise offers ideal environmental conditions to insect pests. No one knows why insects prefer to eat unhealthy plants, but it is an unquestioned fact that they do. Possibly the greater proportion of minerals and lesser amount of sugar in the sap of healthy plants is distasteful to the insects. If this theory is correct, it means that the human race is indeed fortunate, for it would then be possible to starve the insects by improving the quality of human food. In giving the plants an ideal environment, we would be giving the insects the poorest environment in which to live. The net result would be that insecticides would seldom or never have to be used. This would mean the elimination of another source of toxins for humans, inasmuch as we are slowly poisoned by arsenic and other sprays used to control plant diseases and insect pests. The depletion of soil through plowing necessarily leads to decreased yields. With our new understanding of soil culture, it does not surprise us to find that the Chinese, with virtually no agricultural machinery, and the Egyptian, who stirs his ground with the ancient crooked stick, are able to produce more food per acre than the American and Britisher with all of their heavy machinery. The American farmer only produces a fraction as much as he might, simply because he plows his land. In lowering the quality of his food, he also lowers the quantity. As might be expected, the vitamin and mineral content of foods grown in plowed soil is not as high as it should be. We cannot expect foods to be rich in these elements if the soil is defective. The soil cannot supply the plant with the minerals it does not contain itself, nor can it provide the minerals if carbonic acid, which renders these available to plants, is lacking. The manufacture of vitamins in the plant must be retarded if the plant is unhealthy. In the final analysis, we must go back to the soil to find the cause of many of our chemical deficiencies. Scientific soil culture. Soil, as it exists in undisturbed nature in the presence of abundant growing vegetation, generally possesses highest degree of fertility. It is continually covered with thick layers of decaying vegetation. There is also a great deal of plant residue scattered throughout the upper layer of the soil. This green manure, both in the soil and on the surface, serves many purposes. It absorbs several times as much rainfall as the pure soil silt, sand, and clay could normally hold. Erosion is thus reduced to a point almost beyond measurement. There is little or no runoff, even in times of very heavy rainfall. The soil, mixed with the green manure, is so absorbent that much of the water is held over long periods of time, thus reducing to a minimum the danger from droughts. The mixture of carbon dioxide and water in the soil's surface forms much carbonic acid, in this way converting many minerals into usable forms for the plants. The saprophytic nitrogen-gathering bacteria are given an opportunity to get their nitrogen in the open as they work in green manure, thus providing the living plants with the needed nutritive material. There is no difficulty with normal capillary action in the soil. Hard, dried-out clods are entirely absent. In every way, the soil is enriched. The plants are given an ideal environment in which to grow. They are rich in vitamins and minerals and highly resistant to all plant diseases and insect pests. The superiority of nature's method of soil fertilization is evident from all of these facts. Simple common sense should direct us to cooperate rather than interfere with nature in caring for our soil. Scientific soil culture is not new. It had its origin more than 1 billion years ago when the first plant developed. We are merely discovering what should have known all along. Approximately 90 to nearly 100% of all soil is composed of finely powdered rock. The remainder is composed of decaying organic matter, which is provided in form of plant residue. The finely powdered rock is primary source of minerals for plants. The organic matter, upon being reduced by myriads of organisms in the soil to liquid decay products, is the secondary source. It is decaying organic matter which gives fertile soil its black smudge. As the organic matter disappears from the soil, color becomes lighter, and agronomists commence dividing the soil into types in accordance with color, texture, etc. The rich black topsoil of forest lands is from 1 to 3 feet deep. That of grasslands which have never been plowed is even deeper, often several times as deep. On the other hand, the plowed lands of American farms have lost much of their black smudge and contain only a very small amount of organic matter, with a corresponding drop in fertility. Restoring fertility to depleted soils occurs in exact ratio to the amount of organic matter which is reintroduced into the soils and the rate at which this is done. The texture and color of the soil changes entirely. As the organic matter is added and soil types, as such, cease to exist, all types tending to merge into one with similar fertility, color, and texture. There is no specific treatment of specific soils. The changes in treatment involve only quantity and rate, more organic matter being introduced more rapidly in some cases than in others. In undisturbed nature, it is the work of the earthworms, bugs, and other tiny animals to mix the plant residue into the surface of the soil. These animals attack their food with great zeal, chewing upon the plant residue as they mix it into the soil, digesting it into colloidal forms, which are only a step away from the liquid decay products which the plant can use, and then turning their own dead bodies back to the soil. In forest land, as high as 10,000 organisms per square foot are engaged in this process, mixing the plant residue into the soil and converting it into liquid decay products. The work goes on at such speed that, by adding organic matter to depleted soils, fertility is restored in but a few years. Plastic yellowish clay has been transformed into friable black soil within just a year by covering it with a heavy layer of mulch in the form of leaves. Naturally, only the upper few inches of the soil were so converted in such a short space of time, but as the roots of most plants get their nourishment from the upper part of the soil, this change is sufficient to make great differences in the growing conditions of the plants. It may be mentioned in this connection that even trees obtain their chief nourishment from the surface soil, the deeper roots acting as a brace for the tree rather than important sources of nourishment. Many a profitable business is now operating which sells to gardeners earthworms, which can be added to the soil and thus increase its fertility. Such action, whereas it recognizes the important part earthworms play in creating fertile soil, is not based upon a true understanding of the biological activity in the soil. No number of earthworms will particularly aid soil which lacks organic matter. The earthworms of such soil are invariably palled and scrawny, not being able to secure their necessary nourishment. In soil containing liberal amounts of organic matter, the opposite is true. In such soil, fat and robust earthworms automatically develop in great numbers, whether you want them or not. There is absolutely no need to feed earthworms to the soil. These great soil aiders will always be on hand. Proper method of soil care is followed. They are quickly attracted to whatever soil that happens to include an abundance of organic matter in its surface. Organic matter, in the form of green manure, can be added to the soil in various ways. It can be spread over ground as a heavy layer of mulch. Special green manure crops may be grown, or the plant residue, which remains after harvesting the previous crop, may be left on the soil. The land may even be left completely idle, permitting the wild growth of weeds and grasses to take place, which is usually a slower method, as the growth is often not as rapid and complete as that of the green manure crops. The dead remains of any of these forms of plant life, whether they be green manure crops, the residues of harvested crops, the wild weeds and grasses, are turned over to the soil the end of each growing season and added to its supply of organic matter. Any of the forms of green manure mentioned may be introduced into the surface of the soil with machinery if it necessary to prepare a seedbed, as is of particular importance in the growth of annual grain crops. In such cases, it is important that the proper forms of agricultural machine be employed. The implements to be used for such purposes must naturally vary to some extent, depending upon the soil being used, but in most cases, the very heavy type of disc harrows are found most practical. In stony soils and tough sods, heavy cultivators, equipped with chisel-form teeth, are necessary to scarify the soils so that the disc harrow may take hold. And in rare instances, initial plowing may be desirable, providing it is done shallow enough to permit the subsequent disking to cut through the entire plowed layer of ground. Thus far, in the employment of plow-less methods of agriculture, the growth of green manure crops, followed by their subsequent disking into the surface of the soil, has been followed most frequently in grain farming and to a certain extent in vegetable farming. The care of orchard land covered with perennial trees, bushes, and small plants need not follow the same pattern as the preparation of land for the seeding of annual grain crops. Covering the ground with a heavy layer of mulch, at least a few inches thick, and maintaining this layer throughout the year, has been the most common method of restoring fertility to orchard land, and will perhaps also be followed in restoring fertility to land covered with nut trees. The layer of mulch creates new topsoil conditions in just a season or two. This method quickly removes many of the plant diseases and pests, which have long plagued fruit growers. The fruits attain a new level of palatability, possessing rich flavors and being of the finest quality. Flat-tasting fruits, which are so common today, are absent when this form of soil culture is followed. Whether one uses green manure crops or mulch to create fertile soil is also dependent upon the scale of farming being followed. When the fertility of very large areas of land is to be restored, it is generally most practical to grow green manure crops which provide the soil with plenty of plant residue within a short space of time. This is simpler and involves less work than obtaining the plant residue elsewhere and spreading it over the ground in the form of mulch. On the other hand, where small garden plots are developed, with the use of hand tools rather than heavy machinery, it is generally most practical to spread mulch over the surface of the ground. Sufficient plant residue, in the form of straw, leaves, weeds, twigs, etc., is usually available in such cases to cover small areas with mulch and thus permit restoration of soil fertility. Experiments have shown conclusively that no fertilizer other than green manure is necessary to restore the soil to a fertile condition. Animal manure, colloidal minerals, lava, ashes, bone, lime, phosphoric acid, and potash are all unnecessary if sufficient quantities of green manure are provided for the soil. In fact, certain chemical fertilizers are destructive to earthworms and thus interfere with the process of decay of organic matter in the soil. Such fertilizers are anything but beneficial and slow the rate at which fertility is restored. Decaying vegetation is rich in all of the minerals which farmers attempt to supply with artificial fertilizers. It is, in itself, a complete fertilizer. Advocates of organic gardening with the use of compost question these facts, claiming as they do that animal manure or other animal material is necessary in the soil to permit the best results. They may also question whether or not either green manure or animal manure can successfully be used as a fertilizer, unless it has first been decayed in compost heaps. Actually, the results of composting are very much the same as those of the surface incorporation of green manure. In fact, there appear to be certain advantages of letting the plant residue decay in and on the soil rather than in compost heaps, or we would not find the addition of animal products to compost heaps necessary. It is quite possible that there are compensating factors in the soil which make decay of green manure in its surface more beneficial than would such decay be in compost heaps. Those who advocate compost for restoring soil fertility may also be reminded that decay of animal products occurs in the soil, whether these are added in the form of fertilizers or not. The great array of insect and worm life of the soil is itself continually dying and giving way to new life. The decay of these organisms occurs side by side with decay of plant residue and adds to the supply of the secondary sources of minerals for plant roots. By providing the soil with green manure, we cannot avoid the consequent development of animal life, which in turn dies and adds to the supply of decaying organic matter in the soil. It is apparent that man has created his own soil problems. A simple observation of the healthy, luxurious growth of the unplowed plains and forest shows that quite clearly. Man can speed nature's method of soil culture, but he cannot improve it. The history of the science of agriculture is really the history of man's attempts to interfere with nature's method of soil fertilization. The greater the interference, the more successful the agriculturist thought his methods were. When he finally arrived at the point where he found a way to plow the land deeper than ever, he acclaimed the new method as a great improvement in agricultural science. As his plants became more and more deficient in vitamins and minerals, he intensified his efforts to alter and interfere with nature's plan of fertilization. Today, agriculture can hardly be considered a science at all. It is now speculating as to the practicability of breaking the land to depths of 2 or 3 feet with new equipment designed for that purpose. Its chief work consists of creating soil, which provides us with foods which contain only a fraction as many vitamins and minerals as they should. Indirectly, the modern science of agriculture, as it is taught in virtually all universities and practiced on the farms, does much to lower the standard of health of the entire nation. Outlook for the future. What is needed is a science of agriculture which is concerned with the production of fruits, vegetables, and other foods in terms of quality rather than anything else. The aim should be to create foods which do not have to be sprayed with poisonous arsenic and which are capable of meeting the vitamin and mineral needs of man. Soil culture is more closely related to hygiene than to anything else. It should be considered from the standpoint of its effect upon human health rather than its effect upon any special commercial enterprise. This does not mean that the farmer or anyone else need suffer under a rational system of agriculture. It simply means that the production of foodstuffs should be conducted in the interests of all those who use the food, and that the financial welfare of no special agricultural group need be dependent upon any specific practices which happen to be used. Whether or not this calls for placing agriculture on a purely functional basis may be a matter of some debate. However, one thing is certain. There must be a radical revolution of all agricultural practice if foods which contain adequate amounts of nutritive elements are to be made available. Without this change, there can be no such thing as optimum health for the nation as a whole. Agricultural reform must be followed on a national scale if all are to profit therefrom. City dwellers are dependent upon the farmer for the production of their foodstuffs. They cannot use the mineral-rich, spray-free plants of fertile soils if the farmers do not grow them. And the efforts of a few farmers are of little avail if the rest insist upon following agricultural orthodoxy. A planned program of agricultural reform throughout the nation is the only solution. Until such reform takes place, you will have to continue eating foods which have been grown in depleted soil. That is, unless you have a garden of your own. And this is all the more reason for using a natural diet. Even if the unrefined, uncooked foods you eat do not contain as many vitamins and minerals as they should, they are still your best sources of these elements and your best foods. The depletion of soil makes it doubly important that you use foods which have lost none of their vitamins and minerals through the process of cooking and refining. You can't afford to take the chance of depriving yourself of these elements in any more ways than you have to. Perhaps you can't get the best foods, but those you do obtain, you can always eat in their finest condition so as to meet as closely as possible the nutritive needs of the body.